Do you consider yourself entirely safe?
You mentioned whippet shit. How did you cope when you were given whippet shit to speak?
Why, after such a long time out of the public eye, have you chosen to be reassociated with Doctor Who?
After watching The Five Doctors, did you have any regrets about not being in it?
Was the introduction of K9 to satisfy your thirst for a talking cabbage as a companion?
I just wonder why you chose to live next to a cemetery.
What would you have done if Doctor Who hadn't come into your life?
I'd like to introduce you to someone who really is a legend. An actor who has broken all the records in terms of the longest running science fiction series in the world. A veritable legend, Tom Baker.
Thank you very much, thank you. All my life, I was only thinking on a train coming up today because what else can one do? I said, all my life I have flirted passionately and successfully with failure, except for one association, that of Doctor Who. And as I was coming up, I thought to myself, well, I wonder who you really are, Tom. This is quite a difficult thing that I share with most of you. I wake up in the morning, and that's a miracle at my age. I think, well, let's get on with it. That's the first one I've bluffed out, and let's start again. And I think to myself as I come up about my anxieties and how attached I am to my anxieties and how I really have grown fond of my anxieties over the years. And I'm so attached to my anxieties that I organize my entire life around my anxiety. I can't bear to be without them. And I got to thinking, well, this sense of uncertainty which I feel also reassures me. And I got to thinking, what is it that makes an uncertain person, since, you know, it goes without saying, I am as inadequate as the next braggart. What is it? What is it that makes an uncertain person want to perform? What is it? Why is it that we are magnetized by what threatens us most? And I suppose to some extent, the answer to that in all performance is some degree of uncertainty about identity. By that I mean that as a performer, I am most real when at that moment I am most fictional. And when I am most real, as I wake up in the morning in my own house, I am most uncertain of myself. And this delicious paradox, you know, brings you on and makes you think that perhaps this time you'll get the part right, or this time it will work out, or this time you'll be convincing. In other words, what you're really seeking is the kind of power of the storyteller. Storytellers have power because they have insights, they have secrets if the story is a good one. And people will wait while you tell them the story, or wait while you play a scene out. And that gives you a kind of power and makes up for all the uncertainties of the real life. And the unreality becomes real. And the uncertainty becomes assuring, and then you feel very happy. I was in Berwick Street Market the other day. These things happen. And a girl came up to me and she said, she seemed a very nice girl, and she said, hello. just like that. But somehow or other it struck a chill into me, the way she said it. Girls are amazing at that. Just the word hello. She said, hello. I thought, why is she saying it like that? So I said, hello. You already detected my uncertainty. She said, you don't remember me, do you? I said, of course I do. Of course I do. BBC, wasn't it? It was a play. She said, no. I said, well, it was Granada then, wasn't it? It was, anyway, it was Granada. It was Granada. It was a play. She said, no, it wasn't. It was a marriage. I said, what? You were married to me? And she said, yes. I said, how did it go? And she looked me up and down, as if to say, you can't be serious. And just then, someone else came up. I think it was Peter Egan. And he said, hello, Tom. And I said, bye. And off I went and got out of it. And this kind of little event where someone was torturing me, of course it wasn't entirely as I've just told it to you, I'm just trying to make it, compress it and make it interesting. That kind of little encounter there, and my reaction and the way I try to filter it to you as a storyteller, is part of what keeps me going in the face of constant rejection. I have some friends who are Jehovah's Witnesses, and in our society I should think they are the most rejected of all people. And they're terribly nice, this couple. I'm very fond of them. Knock on the door and say, I'm a Jehovah, no thank you. And sometimes it's much more aggressive than that. And the other week, they were recasting a play in London, and I offered myself to play a disintegrating priest. I thought, I'm on more than nodding terms with that kind of dilemma. And my agent rang back and said, no, Tom, you wouldn't like it. I said, what did they say? He said, well, dear, they said no. And I have to live with all that. Now, let me tell you something. In my house at the moment, which is an old house and an interesting old house, there is a power struggle going on. Not between my wife and me. We get on terribly well. We really do. I'm very, very happily married. My wife is immensely rich and finds me terrifically funny and is very encouraging. And I'm very, very beguiled and very vulnerable to people who find me funny and who approve of me. They can, do what they like with me, really. I am so suggestible if people laugh, and my wife constantly laughs. And the fact that she is also immensely rich helps because that reassures me, because I'm a timid sort of fellow. Actually, curious enough, I never did like poor girls very much. I mean, I don't mean that I disliked them, but I mean I didn't like them in the biblical sense. I always found that poor girls always struck me as being rather like poor boys. They were always obsessed with money. And as I was a poor boy, I thought I simply cannot double up this dilemma. I've got to solve it, and so eventually I solved it. So this power struggle in my house has nothing to do with my wife and me. We get on terribly well. However, in the country with nothing very much to do except think about death, and because I'm also the head of the cemetery, on two sides of my house are churchyards. That's why I bought the house. This will actually, I'll get round to that story in a little while. Death is terribly important to me, but I'll tell you a little later. So this power struggle is this. I breed Burmese cats who are very grand and very highly strung. And for the last 8 or 9 years, we've had a very happy time with our Burmese cats. But recently, into the district have come some feral cats. And these feral cats are impinging upon my happiness because they are engrossed, absolutely locked in a power struggle with the Burmese cats in this sense. We have 2 cat doors. And when I'm out of the house, that's in the churchyard, checking on the dead or mowing the tummies of the dead, the feral cats, and in the night, get in. And they get in, and because it's a big house with lots of alleyways, an old school, they spray. Naturally, my highly bred, aristocratic Burmese come and find this spray and are completely panic-stricken and spray over it. And so what happens, a feral cat comes in, sprays against the sofa, the old sofa, and then Oscar comes along, Foxtrot Oscar, and he sprays over that. And then suddenly Dombey comes along, accompanied by Mr. Sidney Toots, these are my Dickensian cats, and they spray over that. And within a quarter of an hour, that corner of the house is uninhabitable. I love them anyway. So gradually, this big house that I live in has got smaller and smaller because of this paralyzing, this coruscating smell of cat pee, which has got everywhere. And my wife adores the cats and doesn't know what to do. Do you remember I made an allusion to the old sofa? That wasn't so important. In a back part of the house that my wife and I inhabit in a very secretive way, well, I think it's secretive anyway. We have a new sofa. And the other night, I was looking out of the window, and my wife was sitting on a new sofa. And suddenly, Mr. Sidney Toots, the cat, got up, and he sprayed. This is the night before last. So my wife screamed. Well, I thought she was rather exaggerating this. And she said, did you see that? He just sprayed on the new sofa. I mean, this new sofa, we've had people visiting us from all over Kent. They come to see our new sofa, and we have dinner, and we talk about the new sofa, because we have very ordinary lives. I said, he didn't spray on the sofa. I said, he sprayed in your ear. She said, did you see that? He just sprayed on the sofa. I said, he didn't spray on my wife's a terrible lip reader. I said, he sprayed in your ear. She said, did you see that? Why don't you answer me? My poor wife has gone deaf in one ear with cat pee. Fortunately, as you know, I've got a big voice. And now I stand on the other side of it. Well, it's only the night before last, so she's still getting used to it. And so I've been trying to win her round. And yesterday, when I was offered 6 episodes of some series to go in Manchester, I had to shout at my wife very hard to make it clear to her what was going on. Now, that's the kind of little incident goes along. The performers or shagged out old comedians or whatever way you want to look at people, or sometimes people you love, because that's an odd thing. Little things happen and one tries to transmute. We used to say rather brutally in Weekly Rep, when we were doing very often very dreary things, that performers, particularly actors, that's what we were interested in, need to be alchemists in that they often have to transmute the whippet shit of dreary material by a process of alchemy into the gold of credibility, of believability. So that something, anyone can say a great line from Twelfth Night, like, I was adored once, and it is so plangent it will hang in the air and an audience will be moved to tears. But, to say a trivial line requires a great deal of artistry, and those actors who can do this strike me as being extraordinary and the sort of people I always want to buy drinks for. Anyway, let me get on to the next stage, because before you only know me as Doctor Who, and before I invite you some questions on that, I better get to the point where, in my anxiety, I made the leap to become an actor. I come from a deeply religious family. I might describe my mother more fairly as a religious maniac. But that didn't stop me loving her, and it certainly didn't stop her from adoring me. This is what spoilt me. Most people are, or most men, I think, are spoiled by their mothers. My mother, adored me, and then it finished up worshipping me, which meant that it made me very difficult afterwards when girls simply liked me. This simply was not enough. And then after a while, sometimes the very silly ones used to, perhaps say, I love you. Even that wasn't enough. And then gradually, as I hurtled pell-mell into elderly life, I adore you wasn't quite enough, because I kept hearing my mother's words behind that I absolutely worship you. So I'm deep into worship. And especially if that's backed up by a certain amount of money, I find it utterly convincing. So from this religious background and my desire for melodrama and to melodramatize myself and to make myself feel as important and to do things as importantly and to see myself as special as my mother saw me, who can do that? Life inevitably is a failure. One can never see oneself. My mother used to see me, as she used to say, I used to see you, Tom, as Liverpool's answer to Michael Wilding. You see, you don't even know who Michael Wilding is. I said, Michael Wilding? She said, yeah. Spring in Park Lane, Alan Eagle. Herbert Wilcox produced it. I said, you see me as that? I mean, this is in 1956. I said, you can't possibly. She said, and with those legs? My mother had a very irrational regard for my legs, which I won't go into. Anyway, so I went off into church, and thus began the melodrama of my life, and led me inevitably towards the idea that I'd quite like to do this for a living. And it started in this way. I'm very, very interested in power, like all storytellers are. We're all interested in power, the moment when we hold someone's attention with a little story. And I used to go in those days, this is in the days before penicillin. Life, I tell you, was much more exciting in the days before penicillin. It really was. People were not so complacent. They weren't. I mean, you go to a dance on a Saturday night, a nail in your shoe, you'd have a swollen ankle on a Sunday, septicemia on a Monday, you'd be in a coma on a Tuesday, dead on a Wednesday, buried on a Friday. And the following Saturday, it seems like only yesterday he was hopping around there. And so during the winter, and the bugs would get out, and influenza, diphtheria. Yes, the first long word I learned as a child was tracheotomy. These diseases used to absolutely waste whole streets, especially clean out all the old ladies. They were gone, absolutely. So dying of tonsillitis even. And so I used to go in my heyday to 2 or 3, and sometimes I once went to 4 funerals in a morning. And so I began to look at all this grief and all this drama that was going around, and I would swing my thurible and inhale. In those days, I didn't inhale, I didn't sniff glue because of my mother's religious convictions. I used to sniff incense. It was absolutely amazing to inhale incense and hear the blessed mutter of the Mass, and as Browning said, see God made and eaten all day long. It really used to lift me into another plane. Anyway, I used to be very sincere and give a good performance at all these funerals. And then one day, it was so cold and I was so hungry, being a Roman Catholic, one didn't eat because one had to go to the Eucharist. I was so cold and the wind and the rain were slashing down. I may be quite wrong about that, but that's the way it seems after all this time. And suddenly, at the end of it all, I was weeping with the cold. And I felt a touch on my arm. And the man I didn't know, whose old mother had been buried, aged 103, so it was a terrible shock to him. And I felt his hand creeping down my arm. A very interesting sensation it was. And I lowered my hand like that, and his hand touched mine. And into it he put an object, a little, well, not so little, hard object. And I held it like that and was full of wonderment, because the fee for a funeral was a threepenny bit, a petty coin of very little purchasing power. When I got back to the sacristy, I opened my hand, and it was a half-crown. My dears, this was an immense increase in wages. And I was corrupted within seconds. I suddenly thought, he thought I was crying because I was sorry his mother had died. This wasn't so at all. But I thought, and he gave me a half-crown. The next day there were 3 funerals. And while my nicer friends, who have gone into the oblivion of an honest way of life, were getting a threepenny bit, tears and snot from Tom Baker, and half-crowns galore, I had become a professional pleaser. I was on my way. This, coupled with the fact that I saw the power, I thought, if that's all they want, this is a doddle. Later on, of course, I had to make my first confession, and then I became a really accomplished professional liar. But the way I was led into that was the power of a boy in my class called Brian Jones, who had 2 immense gifts. I often wonder what happened to him. At the age of 7, this boy, in the little kind of place where we hung up our plimsolls, could fart like a buffalo. I mean, an amazing noise. And you know, little children, when I used to teach in infant schools, they're always squeaking and farting, aren't they? There's a kind of faint odor of farts and wee and plimsolls and all that kind of thing, which is very comforting. I like it, really. And anyway, but not only could he fart like a buffalo out there, which would convulse us, you know, because little children love giggling, but when he came into the classroom, he could fart in such a high register as to be inaudible to us. I mean, it was incredible. Paint used to bubble on the old wall. Pictures of the Sacred Heart used to practically turn around like that. And dogs, innocently minding their own business, dogs always seemed to be going somewhere in those days, would stop in the middle of the street and be run over because they heard it like that. But this absolutely poisonous, absolutely paint-stripping potency of this highly pitched fart would cause a sensation, you see. And Miss O'Malloy, a highly fastidious lady, very solemn she was, and had a tremendous Adam's apple and rather moist eyes and looked like a very solemn Irish wading bird. She would say, "Who's made that terrible smell?" No one, of course, would answer. But Tommy Fitzgerald, my next hero, a vicious bastard he was. He'd say, quick as a flash, "Shall I find out, Miss O'Malloy?" She'd say, "Do that, Tommy." And this bugger would leap up, and he'd turn, like I'm looking at now, and he'd look round, and Miss O'Malloy is there, not able to see the gleam in his eye, as he looked round and thought, "Whom am I going to make suffer today?" And he'd look round, and we'd all desperately shake our heads, and if he didn't like you, you were absolutely done for. And I longed to have the power of Tommy Fitzgerald. And so at that time, as a Roman Catholic boy, going to confession, of course, and not much happening to me apart from Brian Jones's farting, which didn't seem really to be a subject to tell the priest. One had to invent other sins. This is why inevitably, all early religious life leads to professional liars, because, people are leading ordinary lives. Nothing much was happening to me at all. But I had a highly developed ear for what was happening to other people. And so I used to go in and say things that I didn't understand about, like I've had 2 impure thoughts, whatever an impure thought was in those days. And the priest would say, he said, did you take any pleasure in it? He'd say, well, I don't know. And then he'd say, this is my second long word, did pollution take place? I said, yes, sometimes it did, yes, sometimes it did. I wonder what pollution was. This was a grown man talking to a child. And gradually I began to think, because he used to get angry because I had nothing to say. And it was obvious I didn't know what pollution was. And then I began to really get a bit grand. And I do remember with affection when I said to him, it's a week since my last confession, Father Sharkey, and since then I've done murder. And there was a marvelous Beckettian pause, the sort of pause God only took 6 days to create the world. It seemed longer than that. He said, a murder? How many times? And my heart, I said 3. He said 3 in a week. I said yes. And I was going in deeper and deeper, as I often do now when I'm being interviewed by directors, and that's why I don't get many jobs. He said, anybody we know? I said, no, they came from St. Teresa's, the next parish. 3 Hail Marys, he said, and I was so fond of him afterwards for being so kind when he could have crucified me. But you see, by this time, I was set in this way that performers need to be set in. The desire to please, just like a waiter desires to please, except that actors mostly have better lines than waiters. That when a waiter comes along and you say, is a spaghetti alla carbonara a good choice? And he says, oh, it's a very wise choice, sir. And he doesn't know whether it's a wise choice or not. And you say, and the wine, this Ducci di Castelluccio, is that good? Oh, excellent choice. He's trying to please. Actors have to do all, and I was set on my way. Of course I didn't know how to formalize it and become, go to an acting school. That wasn't possible. I devoted myself later to God, and then developed the real technique, a highly developed technique I have, which isn't always visible unless you're involved with me, of treachery. So it became lies and treachery, masked by the apparent desire to please, which of course is just another mask for the desire to actually dominate and to have power. But it needn't be an ungenerous impulse, and I hope it isn't, because my desire to be an entertainer, to amuse, Dickens said, I have had all my life and always will till I die, an honest ambition to add to the sum total of human cheerfulness. I'm a great admirer of Charles Dickens, and I thoroughly endorse that statement. And that's what my whole life is about, an idea of diverting, and if the ammunition is right, that is, if the text is good enough, perhaps touching hearts and making people enjoy a moment or something. That's what I want to do, just to please. Now, if anyone out there wants to ask me a question, I'll try to answer it. And if nobody wants to know anything, I won't be surprised.
Why, after such a long time out of the public eye, have you chosen to be reassociated with Doctor Who?
Well, I think, after a while, it's like, an old tart having been involved in a terrible scandal. And with the distance of time, I don't feel so possessive of it. Years ago, when I used to hear about the others being so successful, and of course I missed, it's no use my denying it, I missed acutely the attention and affection that I felt. That my one great success, I told you earlier, is Doctor Who, when I was a hero, and not a hero in Farnham in Surrey. I was a hero in Farnham in Surrey, but not just there, or not just Liverpool, but in, the Lake District, Abu Dhabi, Melbourne, Australia. Yes, it was wonderful. I was at Belgium. Yeah. That's right. I was a hero in Belgium. Not many of you can say that. And so now, after all this time, and John is now away from the program and is the great authority on it. And so I thought I'd help out and go over this stuff. We also did some tapes when they photographed me, with a movie camera, actually looking at 50 old clips of myself all those years ago, in the days when I could run, and roll both eyes at the same time. But now I can't do that so well. Yes. Yes?
I just wonder why you chose to live next to a cemetery.
Oh, because of my preoccupation with death. I've always actually got on terribly well with the dead. And this is why I have endured as an actor. It's brilliant. You have to actually become very familiar with dying. Death is the problem. Anyone can cope with the laughter and the applause. But coping with dying, which I often have. But for some reason or other, because of that, there's my cemetery experience all those years before, I'm consoled, I'm very at home. I mean it seriously. Actually, I bought a gravestone, because I'm quite a thrifty fellow underneath this. A worn-out gravestone that we're going to throw away, and I bought it, and I've had it engraved with my name, otherwise someone might have stolen it. And so quite often, when I take my Honda mower out there, I stand and look, and sometimes children come up behind me and say, cruelly as only children can, "How long have you been dead, Tom?" That's because my name is on it. It says, I'm of course at the very top, Tom Baker, at the start of David above it. And below that it says 1934 dash. I thought it might be a bit reckless to fill the second one in. But, and that comforts me really. I have in my timidity, timid people, and all of us have moments of timidity. You see, fantasy, like mythology, engenders in us really an heroic frame of mind. That is what's so wonderful. Anything is possible. That's why toy theatre, puppet theatre, it lends itself to epic theatre. It's no use doing a Pinter play like that. That's no good. But if you do, the history of the world or the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, yeah, easy. And so this desire, this fantasy I have has always led me to hope that when the disintegration comes seriously to me, that I might actually be brave and perhaps, dare one say, witty. But of course that remains to be seen. I do feel, and I haven't told many people this, I do feel that at the moment of death, if there were 2 cameras there, I might make a decent show of it, really, yes. One with the loose shot, and then one there for the, for the close shot. And perhaps a very good sound system, while I try to say something amazing, like I could murder a quarter pounder with cheese right now, or something like that. Yes, who wanted to ask me something? Yes, ma'am.
Was the introduction of K9 to satisfy your thirst for a talking cabbage as a companion?
The lady asked, was the introduction of K9 done something to put in to satisfy my thirst for a talking cabbage? Well, it wasn't really. I mean, now I'm so far away from it. It doesn't matter. I can say I never really did approve of the metal dog of K9 because I was so fond of John Leeson in rehearsal, and he was so funny in rehearsal. I couldn't see with all our gifted people there that we didn't just simply put a wonderful costume on John and watch him doing because I mean we couldn't do tight 2 shots without me getting down on my knees. It couldn't go over a box of matches. I find it rather tedious, and I don't like those kind of puns anyway. K9, no, it wasn't so. No, yes?
After watching The Five Doctors, did you have any regrets about not being in it?
Why are you so convinced I watched The Five Doctors? Just to put you in the picture, I never even watched it when it was the One Doctor, because I was on my way to the Princess Arms in Notting Hill Gate usually. I felt I never did watch myself on television or film because I've never been in a powerful enough position to insist on retakes, and therefore whatever I look at, I used to feel I could have done that better with one more go. Yep.
You mentioned whippet shit. How did you cope when you were given whippet shit to speak?
Well, I mean, I think that would be immodest of me to try and demonstrate that. But I mean, I do remember the other day I was explaining in this clip I saw. I couldn't believe my eyes. My performance was so awful, but it had a kind of charm about it. You know, there's something. It was so awful. It would make people. It might become a classic. It might become a classic. It was so awful. It made one's flesh creep. So it's very good for one's complexion. But in it, I had to say, when someone said, "But how did you do it, doctor?" I had to say, shyly backing into the limelight, I said, "I switched the machine from analog to digital mode." Yeah. Yes. And I actually said it. And not only that, another actor went, "Oh," you know, as if to say, "Why didn't I think about that?" And that is the kind of charm, you know. I mean, we were living in a world. I mean, one thing that fans of science fantasy have in common, very few of them, actually certainly the fans of Doctor Who and Star Trek, very few of them are interested in malice. You see that the beguiling quality of science fantasy, our science fantasy of Doctor Who, was this marvelous absence of greed, the marvelous absence of gratuitous violence, you know, the silliness of this Doctor, and of course the irresistible notion of something being larger on the inside than the outside and being able to dematerialize. Oh, if only life were like that. And so we do the next best thing. You know, I play the Doctor and you kindly watched it and then come and listen to me, yes.
What would you have done if Doctor Who hadn't come into your life?
Well, if Doctor Who hadn't come along in my life, how do I know? I mean, I would have, you know, been confined to oblivion or mistaken the whole thing. I wasn't being facetious when I said I flirted successfully with failure. But I really meant it when I said that was my one moment of success. I don't think that people can expect lots of moments of success. I mean, some people, you know, you see shagged out old people. Of course, in television, no one ever leaves television if they can possibly help it, because there seems to be some awful alchemy to television that the buggers never die. Have you noticed? I actually try and ration myself a little bit, which is not difficult at all, since I'm frequently not invited. But you know, you think, again, him again, her again. I thought, my God, look at the way Robert Robinson is brazening that out. Des O'Connor, there he is. And so, you know, I suppose he's hanging on because he's frightened of death. That's what he's frightened of. Well, I'm not so frightened of death, yes?
Is there any role which you haven't played that you'd like to play?
It's a good journalistic question because it suggests instantly, you know, that there's a kind of nagging emptiness in my life. Well, no, there isn't really. I mean, I am such a cheap responder. I found myself the other day, for example, saying how cheap and suggestible I am. A fellow asked me for, you know, a lot of people begging in the streets, and I am deeply, deeply shocked by this for two reasons. One is it's very distressing. Anyone should have to beg. But that's a much bigger question. I can only go into responding as a performer. I am appalled, actually, at the low standard of their scripts. Now, if I've been doing a voiceover and I come away loaded with pennies and guilt, therefore, and, you know, I come across a charming beggar, and he says, "Have you got any small change?" This is not heartbreaking. You know, it betrays a terrible lack of greed. I say, "Listen, kid, you've got to really pull yourself together, you know. I mean, tell me a story. I'm very, very, you know, soft-hearted." So he said, well, what do you suggest? I said, "Well, drop this. Have you got any small change?" I said, "You know, no one even looks at you. You'll sound the same. They're saying it in the same way." I said, "You know, tell me a story. Tell me, but don't tell me the truth." I mean, say, "Listen, excuse me, sir, I'm sorry to bother you, but it's my wife's birthday today, and I'm trying to get a bottle of champagne together, Moet and Chandon, only 87. It's not a vintage year, sir, and I've got £7. I wonder, could you let me have the other 8? To which I would say, "You cheeky bugger, no, but here's 2. Ask the next saphead." And he said, "Then you're going." Or I said, if you want to be really move into the area of artistic begging, then you just simply stop the man and just smile with a welcome and say, "Sir, you've been chosen." "You have been chosen." I am absolutely choking for a large Scotch. To which, I mean, how could you possibly resist that? You say, "My dear chap, here, yes, look, get yourself a bottle, yes, get yourself a bottle." So, you know, I think in our anxiety, this kind of lunacy, it'd be quite nice, you know, that's of course my way to neutralize my terror. Because at the same time, us wanting to be successful and wanting to be loved and wanting to perform all the time, there is always, of course, that beguiling thing that it would be quite nice to finish in the gutter anyway, as long as it wasn't too cold. We're into a very dark area then, but I do think about that.
Do you consider yourself entirely sane?
What? What did he say? Well, I consider myself entirely sane. I mean, that would be extremely arrogant of me to be emphatic one way or another. No. I mean, I leave such a slight question to, up to you. I mean, sometimes I guess I'm partially sane, and sometimes I have a very tenuous grip on reality, and other times I suppose I'm completely in the dark, in fact, perhaps barking mad. But I mean, this is a usual, the ordinary state of humanity, isn't it? Insecurity and uncertainty is part of our humanity. As I said earlier, one can grow to love one's uncertainty. I'm often amazed, because I'm a bit of a hospital visitor, especially if my friends have got serious illnesses and are about my age. I absolutely adore going to see them in hospital and eating their grapes. Actually, I went to see a friend of mine. I went to see a friend of mine the other day who's had this terrible operation on his jaw, and I took him a coconut. And honestly, the anger in his eyes as he lay there. And of course, he couldn't speak properly, so I spoke all the time. Ate his grapes and left the coconut. Yeah, so, the sense of uncertainty is part of our humanity. It's wonderful, isn't it, how awful people can be and then how sublime they can be. I mean, if you hark back to the beggars, one of the things that makes me very uncertain about beggars is quite often, because it seems to me very unusual that beggars can see so much television, or maybe they saw a lot of it in the past, but quite frequently when I throw a 20 pence or 50 pence at a beggar, and then I think, just a minute, and I get in a conversation and discover either he's an actor at the Royal Shakespeare who's researching something called the lower depths, or else he's a journalist from Channel 4, or else he's a fantasist who writes on The Guardian, which is my very favorite paper, because I simply can't bear reality. Yeah.
You stated interest in death in this particular audience. Do you feel that the BBC video releases give a slice of immortality?
Oh, yes. I mean, it is a marvelous thing to once, to be in television, to once, yes, I am a little footnote. Those things will survive somewhere, and someone will know. We are moving into amazing times. I went the other day to a christening. I'm quite interested in new babies. I mean, I have no desire to have one, but I'm interested in new babies, and I like to hold them. And I saw this child being photographed, and I thought to myself, we're in the first generation now where a child's entire life, might be on video, which will confirm a kind of immortality on all of us, that we'll be able to see ourselves in movement all our lives and hear ourselves. I think that's marvelous. Yes.
Will you ever appear as a doctor again?
Well, I suppose really. I've always thought that if somebody made the film, if they make the film, an international film, naturally, of course, the international films, as you know very well, those of you who love films, is that what's so beguiling about them? They are the art, especially the big commercial ones, the art of the shabby compromise, aren't they? That's what they are. This is because, so many tossers have a lot of power and get in the way of the creative process. And so it's a ghastly, shabby compromise. So when they make Doctor Who, and I dare say get the casting wrong, I just thought they might get it right a little bit, that there might be one scene when whoever it is, Donald Sutherland or John Cleese, or will it be Dudley Moore, who knows, actually be walking along somewhere on some planet, and I'll just be standing there and just do that as he passes. I actually was trying to shoot a scene the other day because, this wife of mine who's immensely rich has got the most wonderful camera, and I couldn't get this little girl called Maisie Lee. What happened was, she was standing outside my lovely house, an old school, in between the trees, and then I hove into view, wearing my old man's gear, which I wear in my village all the time. And I tried to get Maisie to say, excuse me, would you like a sweet? And I say, no, thank you. No, she said, please, go on, have two. And so I look in her bag, and no sweets. I say, there are no sweets in your bag. She said, it's all right. I've got lots of them behind those bushes over there. So I say, no. She says, go on, come on. You'll like it. I've got Mars bars and Snickers and Maltesers. Jelly tots. So I go behind the bushes with Maisie, And there's a ghastly silence, the frame, the bushes, ghastly silence. Then appalled screams take place. Another ghastly silence, and Maisie trots out the other side, and then nips off. Comes along an old lady, sees something behind the bushes, screams, camera goes in, and I've been mugged. Actually, I can see now why she didn't want to do it, yes. I thought it was very funny myself, but never mind. Yes, a few more questions? The man there, yeah. You.
You brought to the role of the Doctor a sense of the intellectual. Did you add anything to the script?
Of course, it was all, the man says, did I put anything into the script? I just put myself into the script. He said, of course, when you play James Bond or Doctor Who or whatever, they do have certain things in common. Sherlock Holmes would be another one, and so on. There would be plenty of characters in literature to do that. He said that, of course, it is not required to act. You inhabit those parts. Doctor Who, like James Bond or Sherlock Holmes, is not an acting part in that there can be no fundamental development. There will be no sudden denouement. Sherlock Holmes will never suddenly fall in love with someone. He doesn't like women. He shoots up, but he's got a low threshold of boredom, but he's very rude to his friends. Altogether pretty dodgy, actually. But Bond is an even more licensed monster. With the Doctor, the problem was you always know with a hero which side they're going to come down on. Both the directors and the actors know all this, and the writers. So how, within those utter predictabilities, are you to be surprising? And the only way you can do that, I think, is by entering into it wholeheartedly and by suggesting that you yourself have a capacity to be surprised. A capacity to be surprised is one of the most endearing human characteristics, isn't it? I mean, that is why when you're with someone who's cynical, it is so unbearable. You know, there's nothing so awful as a kind of cynical shrug, you know. And sometimes young people, of course, they don't mean to do this, but they know how to torment their elders. And so when you make an offer of something, you know, say, well, you know, what do you want for starters? And they shrug. And you think, well, and then they shrug again, say, okay, yeah, well, no, you choose. Yeah, I don't mind. And, you know, one wants people to be surprised all the time. Actors want people to be amazed, of course. If ever I went on Desert Island Disc, that's a little revelation, isn't it? I think possibly I might be tempted to just have 8 tumultuous, I mean Wagnerian, bursts of applause. And take the biggest one of all, you know, as my special thing on the island. And I'd sit there, and when I was feeling down, which I often would be on an island because I would hate it, I can't exist without people, I would play this and think, that takes me back. Yes, sir?
Is there any other fictional character you'd like to be associated with?
Well, I don't know about that, really. No, the man someone asked me nearly that. No, I don't think so. Of course, you must understand, depending on my mood, I am entirely fictional myself. Yes?
I've read that you have some unusual arrangements for your funeral. Can you tell us what they are?
Well, I mean, the man says that I have arrangements for my funeral. Well, no, I mean, no one is allowed to my funeral with any gloomy expressions on their faces or black ties or any of that hypocrisy and idiocy. I can't bear that. And no sob stories or sad stories, because I'm supplying the drink. I've left several £100 for everyone to get pretty well, not just legless, I've been stupefied. And that's it. It's got to be a jolly send-off, because, you know, I have had rather a good time. Yeah.
Have you ever wanted to go into politics?
Well, no, I haven't just considered going into politics because, you know, it's bad enough actually having to compromise as an actor. I mean, one of the reasons we hate politicians is because they are the sort of liars who are not charming liars, because politicians purport to have the insights to lead us, to tell us what to do. And of course, you know, I find this altogether a pretty shabby and embarrassing business. So no, I won't go into politics.
In the near future, could we expect to see more conventions and events such as this?
Well, I don't know. Who's the chap who bared his bum on,
You.
Oh, yeah. Oh. That's right, what a memory you've got. Actually, you know, since I did that, I go, you know, visiting the old people's homes in my village like that. And the over 85s have found me irresistibly attractive. I get pinched quite often in the old people's homes, yeah. But they're all about over 85. I find that amazingly anarchic. I just love the idea of a randy 85-year-old. Yeah.
Have you yourself ever tried writing a book?
Well, a few months ago, somebody from mainstream publications, this is absolutely true, saw me on a train and wrote a charming letter to my agent and said, I'm a publisher with impeccable bona fides, and he produced them and said, I saw Tom Baker looking rather interestingly out of the window, and I thought, I bet he could write a memoir, which is the new kind of quick word for autobiography. And so he said, I'm inviting him now. Would he like to come and have lunch with me, and we'll discuss it and publish his autobiography? This went straight to my head. So I put him off for a little while, rushed off to typewriting school, and in no time at all, I mean 6 weeks, learned to play the typewriter up to 32 words a minute. Actually, I was playing quite melodiously. It brought tears to my wife's eyes. And then I rushed out and got a little word processor, Panasonic, and I said, this is not long ago, on a Tuesday night, 8:30 p.m., the wind howling outside, the cats all curled up around a fire, and I said, I think I'll start on my autobiography. And my wife said, well, yes, that would be a very good idea. She looked at her watch. I looked at my watch, 8:30. 32 words a minute, non-stop, scrolling away on my thing like that. 9:10. I said, that's it. She said, what's it? I said, I finished. She said, you finished your autobiography in 40 minutes? She said, can I have a look at it? So I said, yeah, because I love her. It's only when you love people that you can show them what you write. So she looked at it with rising incredulity. I said, so what do you think? Well, she said, I think some of it could be cut. I said, that's a bit hard, isn't it? I think if she hadn't been rich, I would have been angry. I said, but I mean, God, how much of it can be cut? Well, she said, darling, I mean, can I be honest? I said, yes, with rising terror. When they're saying yes, I want people to say no. And she was brutally honest. She said, I think most of it could be cut. So we got it down in the end to one kind of large, stiff card like that with, you know, a picture of me there, my agent's name and phone number on the bottom, and in 5 paragraphs, my autobiography. And I thought, well, maybe I'm onto something here, because instead of selling 400 copies and being remained at the Charing Cross station, perhaps I could sell 3 million copies at 20p. I mean, and the bits that I've read, I find quite impossible to believe. And quite a lot of it is shocking as well. I just don't believe it. Right, there's one or two. Oh no, I'm all right, yes.
Is there any particular aspect of Doctor Who that you think has been responsible for its continued success both here and worldwide?
I think that the one thing about Doctor Who that endures with me, of course, was having been genuinely a hero who amused adults and who enchanted small children. You know, I've often said it to hard-bitten journalists, you know, who kind of look away in embarrassment, but you wouldn't expect journalists to have fine feelings. I've often said that, you know, to be the only man at that time that don't talk to strange men didn't apply to was an amazing thing, because, as you know, all you respectable men here are not allowed in public anymore to show affection to a passing child. This is a very, very sad state of affairs. So to be remembered, and I mean, sometimes I get on aeroplanes and you know, the pilot will suddenly send word and ask me to go up front and take over. To embarrass me with the flight engineer and tell me how he used to watch me when he was at school and make me feel terribly old. But never mind, it's enjoyable, yes?
Did you think you were a hero when you were playing the Doctor?
Oh, no, I can't answer a question like that. That's a terrible trap. I mean, I have aspirations to, I have a great desire to be heroic, to be brave. Everybody does. Yes, I do have a desire to be brave, yes. Whether I am or not. I'm timid really, but I think about it. Yes.
You said you're not scared of death, but are you actually looking forward to it?
Well, it depends actually. Sometimes, if I watch Terry Wogan, I long But Wogan's not the only one. There are quite a lot of incidents on television, and there are quite a lot of people in my pub, and I look at them, and death, the sort of people, they are amazingly gifted. I mean, I can look at Terry Wogan, and all fear of death goes. And death seems preferable. And I long, come, sweet whispering death, yes. Oh, yeah, I look forward to it. I look, this kind of fantasy about the heroic attitude is that I hope when it comes, bang, I can take it. Because, after all, it's pretty inevitable. I'm a bit shocked that absolutely everybody does it, but there you are.
Bearing in mind the preoccupation of the audience and yourself with death, if you were given the chance, what would you write as your own epitaph?
I'd quite like just to have "Here lies Tom Baker." That's all really. You see, when I go out with my Honda doing the tummies of the dead, and it says, Josephus Cheeseman, not dead, only sleeping, and I've just bumped into him with a big mower, and I say, Josephus, you are mistaken, kid. You are not sleeping. You are definitely dead. So I don't know. And I think about him, and I'm very shocked that on gravestones there isn't more of a story. You don't know what he drank. You say, did he like ice in his gin and tonic? You don't know. This is so sad. We must know more about people.
How would you like to have gone out in your final story?
About the lady is asking how I would like to have gone out of Doctor Who. Well, I don't see any other way of getting out, you see, because what one must do try to be generous would be you've got to let the other fellow glide in there, can't you? So you can't actually break that mold without being selfish. And so if I'd had a big moody speech, and about my Auntie Wynne back in Gallifrey or something like that, and tears rolling down my face, then it wouldn't have been fair on the poor fellow who was then going to be superimposed on me. The other thing is, of course, technically, one is severely limited because you have to be lying there because it's a locked-off camera. So there's no question of moving about. No. So I just took it. It wasn't easy, It was a dreadful thing to stop being the hero. And I thought, of course, that I was going to beat all that problems of typecasting. And, of course, I haven't beaten it. But, no, the new generation of directors can't get past that, what they were watching as young boys and girls. And now think, oh, no, Tom, they don't realize that I've dyed my hair white and that I'm heavily made up with all these wrinkles and things like that, and I've had my teeth polished and everything like that because my wife is so rich. They don't realize that because, they're cocooned in their little world and things have changed. But maybe I'll get an opportunity later. Well, yeah, go on.
You talk of the need of heroes and fantasy. Are you sad that the programme Doctor Who is no longer on the air?
Well, I do feel sad about it because I find actually that so many of the so-called heroes on television, or not so many, some that look at me when I'm washing up, I honestly don't. I mean, if I can escape into the... I'm a bigger escaper from reality than most people, and I rush into the hard covers of Dickens, or Hardy or someone like that, or Saki. I quite like the cruelty of Saki from time to time. Yeah, I do think it's very sad, but quite a lot of the so-called heroes, don't strike me as being complex or heroic. They have all of this... You see, there's an awful tendency, isn't there, in modern dramatic literature, popular literature. I'm not talking about plays, but, pop stuff. There's an awful kind of annihilating sarcasm to everything. It's so easy if you've got the big guns, to dismiss people, to be sarcastic, to crush them. That's the simple way, And then frequently, when they do that, it's leaving the other poor person, often a girl, by the way. I mean, you must admit, in popular television, you'd really wonder if any progress or much progress has been made. I mean, women in popular television, with certain distinguished exceptions, are what? They're just crumpets, hatchet-faced bitches, mothers-in-law, secretaries, aren't they? Of course there have been some exceptions, but most of the writing for women actually bears out all those terrible stereotypes and leaves them on the end, of taking orders from men, really. I used to think at one time, I was in love at the time with Sylvia Coleridge, who was incredibly lustful for me. And I thought this was wonderful because she was nearly 80. And there was a time we were changing one of the girls, and I said, can't we have Sylvia, an old lady, as the assistant? But they didn't think that was funny at all. Well, yeah, go on.
Tom, how do you feel about still being so fondly remembered for parts you left over 10 years ago?
Well, the man asked how do I feel about being, affectionately or fondly remembered for something I did it is indescribable because it makes me feel so grateful and so confident coming along here. I mean, of course, I could have, you know, banged down a few headings and come and given you some load of old balls about, you know, it makes me feel confident where I am with you people, that there isn't any hostility. Although, I mean, I can stand a certain amount of hostility. I'm also quite interested in pain. But it makes me mostly grateful, you know, that it's something to make me happy. And it stacks up, and that's why when times are more difficult, I think about times like this, or if I wanted to, I never do, but if I wanted to, I could turn up some old tapes, and, or I tell you what I do read some of the fan magazines, because they mostly say nice things about me, and that makes me feel very warm. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and good night.